During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Air Force dropped an estimated 2.3 million tons of bombs on Laos. That's more ordnance than was used in all of Europe throughout the Second World War. Now, Laos had declared itself neutral, but it still became the world's most bombed country, a title that it holds to this day. But Laos doesn't suffer alone. After the recent assault by Israel, Lebanon is believed to have as many as 1 million unexploded cluster bombs littering its countryside. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we'll ask just who is responsible for the dormant weapons that continue to take lives long after the guns have fallen silent. By the end of the Vietnam War, it was estimated there were 7 unexploded cluster bomblets for every man, woman and child living in Southeast Asia. Since then, in Laos alone, at least 11,000 people have been killed by what are now known as ERWs, or explosive remnants of war. Almost half the victims have been children, and more than half the country's farmland is still littered with these bombs. As Marga Ortigas found out, they're not only killing people, they're a major impediment to daily life and to economic growth.
13-year-old Tom reads when he misses his best friend Sompan. He can't play anymore since he injured his leg a year ago, the day Sompan died. They were playing near this temple. Sompan found a UXO. It killed him instantly. Tom was standing behind him and feels lucky he's alive. Even so, shrapnel was embedded throughout his body. Most people die from the explosion. Tom lives in Giang Quang, one of the worst UXO-contaminated areas in Laos, the country with the most unexploded ordnance in the world. Almost 5 million bombs were dropped here over 100 years of conflict, making Laos the most bombed country in the history of warfare. The United States dropped most of them during the Vietnam War. 30% didn't explode. They're still lodged here, and hundreds are being killed every year. It's too dangerous to farm most of the land here, keeping Laos one of the poorest countries in the world. King Pet remembers that war and now works with a UN-sponsored group called UXO Lao. They aim to clear the country of leftover bombs. King Pet says it'll take 400 years. They lack equipment and trained personnel. The team is on its way to a newly discovered UXO. 98 UXOs have been found in this area in 2 days. Local farmers send in reports to UXO Lao, who come over, mark the area with red flags, and right now they're getting ready to detonate one. Across town in another field, more red flags. A sound locals are used to. No one here flinched. It's Awareness Day, and residents are learning all about the dangers of UXOs.
It's one thing to teach about UXOs now, but how is a little child to really understand the dangers?
Farmer Yang Vu doesn't hide his anger. He and his wife have just lost their 5-year-old son.
It was awful. There was blood everywhere. His insides were out, his head. The bomb broke him in pieces.
He says he can only blame those that dropped the UXOs in the first place. And his anger is shared by many. King Pet of the clearing team says the U.S. is not doing enough to help. Last year, the U.S. government spent $3.5 million on UXO activities. It spent that same amount in 2 days during the war.
There are too many wars now. Laos has been forgotten.
But Laos cannot forget. It has had to learn to live with UXOs, recycling disabled bombs. A fence, a planter, a table stand, and even a cowbell. They also trade scrap metal for much-needed cash. Laos has also had to learn to live with silence. These are the everyday sounds of life here. So children are learning new rhymes. Don't go play too far, they sing. Don't make your parents worry where you are. In the mountains there are bombs. Don't go play too far.
I'm joined now from our London studio by Ray McGrath, a co-founder of the international campaign to ban landmines, a co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. He's an active campaigner against the use of cluster munitions. In our Washington studio is John Pike, director of the think tank globalsecurity.org. He says cluster munitions are a necessary part of modern warfare. And Poi Kia is in Manila. He is a Cambodian journalist who has covered the story of unexploded munitions out of Cambodia for many years now. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us today. Poi Kia, let me begin with you, if I might. The problem of landmines in particular continues in Cambodia to this day, perhaps not in quite the same extent as in Laos. But give us a little bit of your experience of what it's like to live in a country where your daily activity can end in disaster.
Well, the country of Cambodia, as the history shows, and the world as well knows about the problem happening in Cambodia today. And landmine and UXO, unexploded ordnance, is one of the major problems that many Cambodian people are facing. The Cambodian government has estimated that between 4 to 6 million landmines and UXO have been planted since 1967. That means during the Vietnam War. And until today, there are many Cambodian people suffered from this kind of landmines and UXO.
We saw in that film that the children in Laos are actually taught as part of their school curriculum not to wander too far and to be aware of potential explosives. Do they have similar educational standards in Cambodia?
Yes, over the past years, basically since 1992, that the Cambodian government took a very serious action with the help from international community. And there are until today 4 agencies working on this particular project. That is 2 government agencies and 2 international agencies working on this.
All right, well, let's go to Ray McGrath. Ray, these stories are ones that you've heard many times before, and you only have to go to the internet and do a quick search, and you'll find that it's a story that's been going on for 30 years now. Are you surprised and obviously, I guess, a little disappointed that all this time later you are spending your daily life trying to get this problem sorted out?
It should surprise me, but it really doesn't. You know, hearing stories like this from Xian Quang, I first went to Xian Quang when we conducted the first surveys of UXO there in 1993. That was 20 years after the bombing finished. And then we hear still that those same awful accidents are happening. Whether we should call them accidents, I'm not really sure. One thing is certain, and that is that it's going to take a long time to solve this problem. And Kim Pet has every right to be more than angry about the death of his son and the fact that there isn't enough money being spent on clearing this mess up. And unfortunately, it's one of those situations where there isn't anybody to point the finger at. This is a United States responsibility. All this bombing was done by the United States, and most of those things are cluster munitions. They're submunitions which didn't act as they were designed,
right.
And they're just They're destroying people's lives.
John Pike, we'll get onto the issue of whose responsibility it is to clean things up in just a minute. But let me just first ask you, I'm sure that every US citizen that saw that film we've just showed would feel enormous sympathy, and it would resonate greatly with everyone in America. But the problem being, they probably never see things like this. It's obviously not much of an issue in the American cultural sphere right now, is it? What's happening in places like Laos?
Well, certainly when you think about the challenges that America's military is facing in Iraq, when you think about the other places that America's military is engaged, places that America's military left decades ago, obviously are having a very hard time getting attention before the American public. And I think that that's reflected in the sort of funding levels you're seeing for humanitarian demining. But the American military is aware of this problem, is aware of ways of reducing this problem, and they are spending money on ensuring that it's less likely to happen in the future than it was in the past.
I mean, you say this, and certainly the U.S. Is spending money on helping in this situation, but is the American military really that aware? Is the American government really that concerned that issues like this are particularly high up on its agenda?
Well, absolutely. I mean, America's military is not in the business of killing civilians decades after the war is ended. America's military is in the business of winning wars quickly and as humanely as possible, and unexploded ordnance is in no one's interest. There have been considerable improvements in microelectronics and fuses over the last several decades, and the U.S. military and defense industry believes today that it's possible to build munitions, to build in particular cluster submunitions that are simply not going to have the dud rate, not have the unexploded ordnance problem that we had decades ago when electronics and fuses were far more primitive than they are today. This problem is never going to go away completely, but with luck and with some effort on the part of America, it'll be less of a problem in the future.
All right, a number of issues brought up there. We're going to have to take a quick pause for a break. We'll be back and continue the discussion in just a couple of minutes. Do stay with us.